I'll give you 5%.
So, Merrill, how long were you in Congress? And what happened?
He offended the Republicans. He's a good Republican. He offended the leaders. As we await the return of the last members of our committee as well as a couple of the witnesses, let me remind you again about the fire sale over there that Stan Friedman's having. You might even talk him into a better deal than this if you're good at it, but 3 $15 items, that'd be $45. No, he's letting it go for $40. We have people headed out the doors to take advantage of this deal right now. Stan Friedman, he doesn't go for the sale very often. 4 items for only $50. That should be $60.
That's a challenge in and of itself, isn't it?
Those of you watching on our online stream, if you missed anything, the archive will be up, I understand, in a couple of weeks, both in English and Spanish. And within a couple of weeks, perhaps a month at most, they're adding Japanese, Chinese, Arabic. All of this is going to be translated into multiple languages, which reminds me to have everyone turn to those 4 people in those boxes in the back of the room, and aren't they lovely? They're all lit up in there. The 2 on the left are translating into Espanol, and the 2 on my right are translating into Chinese. And if you haven't had a chance to check out the Chinese language channel, well, go ahead and do that. It makes the hearings even more incomprehensible, at least to me. I continue to vamp while we await the return of a couple of witnesses in our chair. Oh, they are? But not in the other languages yet. All right. So I've been given to understand that it's already up, yesterday's archive? This morning, wow. These guys, we have some, you know what, since I've been thanking the translators, turn to the other side of the back of the room. Look at all those people back there with them computers and whiz-bangs and wobnobs, and that guy in white over there with the bunch of cables plugged into something that would probably electrocute any of the rest of us. Let's turn around and give all the technicians a round of applause. Thank you, production team, and the cameraman behind me, and whatnot. It's now 3:40, and it looks like we have almost everyone here. So what I was given to understand is that not only the archives for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday available online right now in both Spanish and English, but even the archive of today for the morning sessions up till noon is now available online. So when we all get back to the hotel tonight, let's fire that up and watch it all over again.
Oh, yeah.
What do you say? One time's not enough, is it?
Yeah, right. Or else you could get a life.
Yeah, but what fun would that be, huh?
You're ready.
All right, just a second.
Too nice.
We're going to get started. The meeting will come to order. I want to thank the panel for being back again. This is terrific having the kind of international panel we have had today, this morning, this afternoon. The fact is, sometimes we only think about ourselves as opposed to what's happening in the world. So I appreciate you being here. We all appreciate you being here, and thank you for your time and your patience. And with that, we will start with this panel, this is a chance for you to ask questions in depth. And if we are good about it, we can go 2 rounds. You'll each have 12 minutes. So if you take all 12 at once, that's okay. If you want to take 6 and then 6 later, you can do that. So I'll try to keep track of that, or you can help me keep track of that. And do I have anyone that would like to start?
I'll start.
All right, Ms. Woolsey, Representative Woolsey.
But first I have to swallow. So my question is to each of you. If the United States becomes more transparent, releases files, and is more open about this situation, the United States government, would that be a help or a hindrance to your country and our relationships with you, and why and how? Start down there. Okay.
Well, first of all, I'd like to clarify for the record, because a lot of people have a misconception that all these other countries have been wonderful and released all these files, and the U.S. has released nothing, which is totally not true. I mean, you yourselves have been dealing with American governments, like the documents like the one about Peru and things like that. So the U.S. was actually the first country to release UFO files. Just for the record, I want to make that. Doesn't mean that they've released, hardware or final conclusions. I mean, I'm not saying they've released everything they have, but it was the law. The Freedom of Information Act, as you know, had been amended as a result of the Watergate scandal, where you could sue the government. Mm-hmm. And then it occurred to some people that because there had been these rumors that the CIA and other agencies had been involved in ufology. For years, the U.S. had said that only Blue Book, that's the only thing they had ever done about UFOs. So there was a famous lawsuit around 1977 against the CIA for their files on UFOs, because there was many indications that they had done this thing called the Robertson Panel in 1953, a scientific conference on UFOs. And there was a group formed called Citizens Against UFO Secrecy back in those days. I know the story very well because that's when I was getting started as a journalist in the subject. And they sued the CIA, because the law had been amended, and now you could, in the old days, you were at the mercy of the government, like the British used to be too, until they passed the similar law, where basically the government would release what they pleased, and you had no recourse. But after Watergate, they amended that law. And so this group sued the CIA, and the CIA knew that they were going to lose the case because there was enough evidence about at least the Robertson Panel. Mm-hmm. So rather than go to court and be humiliated by a judge, they decided to, cut their losses, and they released 1,000 pages of documents. And that made huge front page stories. I mean, it was on the New York Times, on the Washington Post. It was a big story at the time. But now there's kind of a amnesia. Within, and this, partly the UFO community themselves are guilty for this, because it's kind of politically correct to always criticize the U.S. government and say that the foreign governments are great. Well, it's the same thing. I mean, the Russians sure have released some things. Have they released everything? No. And the same, maybe some of the smaller countries might have released everything because they have less complex programs. So I wanted to get that on the record on this hearing. And then that was followed by the FBI that released their files, where they're currently in a thing called the Vault, and they're online, and then the Defense Intelligence Agency and everything. And so the U.S. government has released stuff, but there's still a lot of gaps. I think we definitely would be helpful for everybody that everybody releases just about everything, unless it was something of truly national security that would affect that country. But otherwise, too much secrecy, it doesn't help anybody.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. I figure we've got 2, 4, 6, 8 minutes left. If you can kind of think in 2-minute segments, I'd appreciate it.
Ma'am, as my colleague has indicated, my understanding certainly is that the US government's public position is that it has already disclosed its files. I'm not aware, given that the UK government is nearly complete with its process of releasing this material, that any further releases from America would either harm or help our UK process.
Thank you. Well,
I would agree, especially with Antonio, that I believe the Americans have sort of got a bad rap in this deal, that basically everybody in the world is just releasing citing files. Nobody's releasing files, the real files, the ones we want to see. So the Americans have done that. In fact, I believe, I'm maybe one of the few researchers who have written on this, that the American government is actually leaking parts of the story, using disinformation to cover it. But I don't think it's really going to affect the rest of the world. I think everybody is waiting for the Americans. The Americans are running the show, and everybody's waiting for the Americans to make the first move.
孙教授, I think that if we can make everything public and such a high tech is going to be shared by all humankind in the world, this is a very good thing. However, generally speaking, that through our work, and if we disclose all those UFO information or ET information, it's going to be benefit the whole humankind. However, every government consider UFO as top secrets of defense secrets, different classification, and all the national security. If they treat the issues as a UFO issues, purely UFO issue, that will be much easier. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult.
Opinion, I must say that since Europe, Russia, Latin America, the Vatican, even China, which has an open attitude, after all, have some kind of disclosure attitude, why should the United States of America be different? There is a definite reason from an historical point of view. Probably as the most important world power, the United States they feel a particular responsibility, and they surely fear that the UFO problem may cause a sort of uncontrollable reaction in the general public. So this is a possible explanation for the cover-up, for this conspiracy of silence, if you like. But I'm sure that since there is no longer the possibility to cover all these subjects, the United States will be obliged in the next future to do something. Because consider that the world power who will have the courage to say things as they were will be considered much more than all the others. And probably this is not yet understood. And when this may happen, probably the United States may have something positive for themselves.
Thank you very much. And with that, Madam Chair, I will reserve the balance of my time.
Okay. Representative Bartlett.
Thank you. Mr. Cameron, you mentioned mental phenomenon. Is that related to the to an interest in consciousness, and could you explain a bit?
Okay, let me give you the examples. I only figured this out a year ago. I've known about the top secret memo and the reference to mental phenomena. When we later, when it occurred to me what had happened, we, as I mentioned in my testimony, we ran across Dr. Eric Walker, who was the former president at Penn State University, and during the conversations interviewers were having with him, they were pressing him on MJ-12, who runs the cover-up, is it all Americans, is there more than 12 people? And Walker cut him off. This is 1991, 41 years later. Walker cuts him off and says, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? The interviewer from Britain had no idea what to say. Walker answered his own question. He said, look, unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken in. He's referring to the control group. Very few people understand it. Then 2 years later, Ben Rich, who ran Lockheed Skunk Works, and I can remind the Congress that you guys funded all these operations, the U-2, the SR-71, the stealth fighter, the stealth bomber, the drones. This guy ran Lockheed Skunk Works in 1993. He's giving a lecture to the UCLA engineering alumni. And he stands up and the last slide that he shows is a flying saucer, and he says, We now have the technology to take ET home. We've discovered the mistake in the equation, and it's going to take an act of God to get this thing out of Congress because it's so deep black. Two of the people in the room were UFO researchers. They chased him out of the room realizing this was a significant point in history. And they said to him, Mr. Rich, you said you've discovered the mistake in the equation. What are you talking about? We're interested in UFO propulsion. How does it work? And just like the Canadians in 1950, just like 1991, Eric Walker, Rich turns around and says to him, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? The one guy says, that just means everything in time and space is connected. He said, that's how it works.
Thank you. Mr. Pope, you mentioned air safety issues. With the maneuverability of these craft, do you mean that we're concerned that they would be hostile or they'd accidentally run into us or vice versa?
Well, sir, it's more it's the possibility of a collision between a commercial or military aircraft and whatever these UFOs might turn out to be. That was the concern. And I mentioned that there are on case file a number of near misses. Indeed, I believe a new case was publicized in mainstream media just 2 days ago.
But there had never been a collision?
Not in the UK, sir, no. And I mean, a couple of near misses that were close enough that the pilot flinched and called on one occasion, look out, but no collision. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
You mentioned electromagnetic propulsion. Does that include anti-gravity?
I don't know, sir.
Oh, that was Mr. Huneeus who mentioned that in his report. You mentioned electromagnetic propulsion.
That was in the French report about the Transin-Provence case, yes. And I think they had found it, if they can show the slide of the Rockefeller from the briefing document we had discussed previously. They couldn't find it at the time. That was in their conclusions. No, that's again the same page. Yeah, that's the one. Conclusion, probably cannot read it too well from here, but yeah, there you go. So this is the landing case in the farmer's field in Transin-Provence in 1981. Conclusion, physical phenomena of unexplained nature, high probability of electromagnetic mode of propulsion. And this is an official chart from the French Space Agency. So that's their conclusion. I also, since you had asked about the near collision, I might as well add that that's, as I explained in this morning's testimony, that again was one of the main reasons of the Chilean committee, the CFA, to ensure air safety operations. That's part of their mission. And in their files that they have released in the radio pilot communications, they have also a couple of cases of near collision, which you can actually hear because they posted the audio tapes on their website. There was a case in Puerto Montt in the south of Chile in 1988, where you can literally hear, it's in Spanish, of course, because it's in Chile, you can literally hear the pilot freaking out because this object, unexplained, he's called the control tower saying, what is that object? Do you have traffic? The control tower gets back to him, no, we have no scheduled traffic. He said, well, this thing is almost about to crash with me. And then the people at the control tower, this object hovers near the airport, and so it was seen from the ground, not just by the pilots. Then the personnel at the airport was able to see this object hovering over the airport. And of course there was not a near collision, but there was a famous similar case at the O'Hare Airport in Chicago in 2006, I believe it was, which was quite significant, seen near the American Airlines terminal. And it only leaked out because I think it was the Chicago Tribune got wind of it, but the FAA never made any kind of official investigation or comment. So that is a problem that regardless of what UFOs are, regardless of their origin, yes, they can pose a threat. And then General Bermudez, the head of the committee in Chile, also made another point. He says, even if it's not an immediate near collision, the pilot might get distracted because he's seeing something that is not supposed to be there. So it's maybe that he's not going to crash with the airplane, but instead of concentrating on flying his airplane, he's being distracted by an unknown object that is somehow, getting near him. So these are among the reasons that this subject should be investigated by the civil aviation agencies, which of course Chile is doing, but it should be done in other countries as well.
The story this morning of the pilot chasing this UFO, and I think I heard that in spite of how big it was and how obvious it was, there was no radar track?
I
think that's what I remember hearing.
Yeah, I'm not sure of that. But I might as well add, there another very significant case which happened in Iran in 1976, which again was revealed by American defense attaché documents. That's how the case became public. Very famous case. The pilot at the time was a captain, eventually became a major general in the Iranian Air Force. In fact, he came and testified at a previous symposium here at the National Press Club. He was the pilot that is same thing. This huge UFO object was flying over Tehran. This was in the days of the Shah. So the U.S. had very good relations, as you know, with Iran, and that's how they got all the reports. But the difference there is that as he was instructed, again, to fire at this object because the object was not responding, was not identifying itself, then suddenly all his weapons control panel was jammed and he could not fire. The thing wasn't working. Wow. The electromagnetic communication, the radio, everything was malfunctioning. This was an F-4 Phantom jet. And then, according to this pilot, who later became a general, he said that from the UFO, like a little object came, like the UFO was responding. That's as close as an actual combat between a UFO, and it's all documented by the US government. There was even an evaluation by the Defense Intelligence Agency, which was later declassified, that called it an outstanding UFO report because it validated the existence of UFOs. This in the words of our own government. And they list all the reasons why, because it was multiple witnesses. Some of the witnesses were very high-ranking generals. 2 airplanes had been scrambled. One of them had the malfunctions. So this is real. Now, where did that UFO came from and what was its purpose? We don't know that. But that the object was real, there's no question about it.
If it's true that these things can absorb bullets and not be affected, then somehow they might be able to absorb radar and have no reflection?
Yes, well, for many years, researchers in ufology have known this, and it's referred as the electromagnetic effect. There are many cases involving cars. With airplanes, it's more worrisome because a car can stop in the middle of a close encounter and nothing will happen except inconvenience. But if you're flying an airplane and your electrical system, your engine stalls, you're in trouble. But with airplanes, it's not as common, but there have been cases, although not crashes. Or perhaps, but I'm not right now aware of crashes. But with cars, it's fairly common. And this was referred, even in the 50s, as the electromagnetic effect. It is assumed that the UFO is emitting a field of energy. And this field of energy then will interfere with electrical systems. And even blackouts have been many cases of power blackouts. Even the major blackouts, even in the United States, there were reports of UFO sightings near the power station where the blackout was triggered. There was, in fact, as a matter of fact, in Argentina, a case in 2009, which made some headlines, where there was a blackout in a town called Joaquin Gonzalez in some province in Argentina right now. I forgot which one. And well, most people just had a power blackout, and then they saw this cigar-shaped object hovering over the city. But there was a reservoir with a power dam nearby, and one of the witnesses was fishing, because people go there for recreational fishing, and one of the witnesses said that saw this disc hovering over one of the transformers, and there was like an exchange of energy between the UFO and the transformer, and as this energy exchange was happening, boom, there was kind of like a flash, and then the whole area went dark. So there is definitely an electromagnetic effect, but it needs to be studied more at depth, for which we need resources to do so.
Is there what are the suggestions as to what the energy source is that these craft use?
Well, I'm not really an engineer, you know. I'm a science reporter, so I can give you a general idea. But they will have, I think tomorrow or there was a session about technology. Did it happen already? I forgot. But there is supposed to, tomorrow. Tomorrow there is a session of technology where you will have people that would be more qualified than me. There's been, all these terms, anti-gravity and things like that have been used, you know, but you better get a response from someone more qualified than me for the real technical details. But I can give you just a general idea.
Thank you very much. My time is up. Thank you.
Thank you. Congressman Cook?
Thank you. I'd like to resume with Grant Cameron and to talk about the Wilbert Smith files. Wilbert Smith was the minister of worked for the Ministry of Transport.
He was a senior radio engineer, and he later became superintendent of radio regulations for the Department of Transport.
Okay, in Canada, of course.
Yes.
Thank you. And this file on UFOs was begun about 1950. Am I right?
The official government file goes from 1950 to 1954. His personal files, he died in 1962, became public in about 1982. His son released them to the University of Ottawa.
Okay, thank you for that, because I wanted to check for sure on when he died. And that was about 20 years before those files were released?
Correct.
Okay. You've obviously looked at what's in those released files.
Yes.
What is the very best evidence in those Wilbert Smith files that we've just been talking about? The very best. If you had to take one specific incident or example, the very best you can think of an ET association with an unidentified flying object. And then I'm going to ask, in fact, or let me put either any kind of ET association or body found association.
Okay, that's the testimony I presented today. The best we would have is the question that Wilbur in his files asked to Dr. Robert Saubacher in Washington in 1950 about the validity of the crash saucer book released in 1950, and he gets the response, the facts in the book are substantially correct. Now, Wilbur had a lot of interaction. There was contacts. They were in contact with an alien, the same one that the CIA was in contact with. There's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes. But in terms of an actual document, in terms of the actual material that's the hardest evidence, is the material that he got from the Americans in 1950, which he used to write the top secret memo, which he sent to the Deputy Minister of the Department of Transport, asking for funds to research propulsion, of UFO propulsion, and he was given authorization, and that project ran till 1954 when this overflight of the flying saucer station took place, and they shut the program down and made the statement, there's nothing to it, no ETs, all that.
But the document, in other words, the best evidence of a body found is what was spoken between Dr. Saubacher and Wilbert Smith. Is that what I'm to understand?
In terms of
and
stuff
is that
we,
in one of those documents that was released?
Well, it's in the, I released to you today, Smith's handwritten interview of the interview that he did in 1950.
And I saw that.
And it's later substantiated by Robert Saubacher, who says there were reports of instruments or people operating these machines, because he was questioned after Wilbur Smith died. People like Stanton Friedman started looking for him, and he says, I remember in talking with some of the people in the office that they got the impression that these aliens were constructed, and he talks about what the aliens look like. And he mentions in the room were von Braun, Oppenheimer, a number of the top scientists in the United States in 1950 were telling these stories. So Saubacher confirms the fact that he talked to Smith in 1950, and that he confirms in the letter that there were alien bodies involved.
I appreciate your answer, and that's what you've just described is what you feel is the best evidence of the question I asked.
Yes.
Okay, fine. Okay, to Nick Pope, I'd like to ask you, while you were working in the Ministry of Defense in the UK, did any of your superiors tell you that part of your job is to ridicule English citizens or any UK citizen who had maybe filed a report or a sighting that was legitimate?
Nobody told me to do that directly, sir, but there was certainly a sort of unofficial policy that in responding to media inquiries, the press office would deliberately slip in terms such as little green men and flying saucers to disparage and downplay the subject.
Okay. And they haven't told you what to say as a private citizen, have they?
No, sir, but when I've written books, which I have in the past, I've had to submit those for official security clearance.
Okay, now I'd like to turn to our witness from the People's Republic of China. Dr. Sheila, you've said what I think are truly interesting things when you say that the majority of the people of China absolutely believe not just in UFOs, but in an extraterrestrial source of the UFOs, and they believe in aliens. In fact, you make a statement you made a statement earlier in your testimony that that you put the existence of aliens right in with UFOs as something that's clearly, well, certainly you believe it. I understand that, and you talked about 5 events of what you called third kind cases. And I'll repeat those from your testimony a few hours ago. The Phoenix Mountain event. I want you to listen to these events carefully. You know them well, I'm sure. The Phoenix Mountain event, the Faxang Trapeze event, the Beijing Kong event, the River Forest event, the Mayang Alien Research Station event. Of those, I take it those are the top, maybe some of the top 5 of all that China has gathered, which has been amazingly voluminous. Give us an example from 1 or 2, if you'd like. And I want to make sure that I reserve appropriate balance of time. So please, okay. In fact, I'd like you to be thinking about that question, because I'm going to reserve the balance of my time to come back to you on this. I think and I want to know the best thing that you can tell us from any of those events you've already mentioned that would give us some sense that there's an extraterrestrial origin to these sightings and to these UFOs, or that there are bodies or aliens, alive or dead, from these. Okay? And I'll be back to you. Thank you. Sorry, I can't allow you to answer right now. I've got to cut you off because.
I would yield my time to Merrill to go ahead and pursue that, so he doesn't have to.
I did want to reserve them, as long as I'm able to continue.
You can do the full 12 minutes now.
Well, I don't want to. I mean, I'm not trying to hog the time here, but let's hear it. Go ahead.
Let's hug it.
Yes. I would like to talk about 2, the first one and the last one. The first one is the Phoenix Mountain event. This is in the northeastern China. There is a farm there, and a ranger saw a flying disc within 100 meters. And he felt really uncomfortable, so he tried to stay away from that flying disc. And he and his cousin felt that.
Of this, or the time for its central.
In 1994, in June 1994. So on the second day, this ranger led a dozen of people from the same farm trying to find that flying disc again. And what happened was that there was a strike, a lightning coming from the sky, and he was attacked by this lightning right on his head. So he fainted, and during the time that he was out, he felt that aliens were communicating with him. He had a lot of physical reactions, and he claimed that aliens had implanted some objects into his body. And after that, this alien also had a sexual contact with him. And after that, he was told that this sexual contact is a very...
Anything you can refer to that would show something that could make the Chinese government or any other government aware of any of this, to make this story so far, which is a pretty significant story, of course, but to make it accepted by, does the Chinese government know about this story? Let me put it that way. And have they commented on it? And what evidence has been given to them about the story you just outlined?
Well, we have a lot of evidence in this event. We have gathered more than 100 people and conducted more than a dozen of investigations. We have used lie detectors to test and verify the truthfulness of the things that these people are claiming. So we have gathered information, and we have done investigation in this area. And in this incident, we have seen this very special interaction between aliens and human beings.
Your prime case, rather than say the Beijing Zhou event, as terms of the question I asked, which is your best evidence of extraterrestrial involvement, or an alien, or which you've certainly described. You've described aliens in a little more drama than, or not drama, I'm not going to use that word, I'm saying with more activities than anybody else has described them in the 3 or 4 days here. And so I just want to know to what extent the Chinese government is really aware or believes it, and that doesn't necessarily prove it one way or the other by any means, but I just want to know where documentation can be, where we can start working on this case, because this is kind of an interesting one, very interesting one.
Right. The Chinese government, I think they know, because this incident was very, very hotly spread within the country. Everybody knows it's very popular. It was reported everywhere. But after more than 10 years of research and investigation and verification, as well as evidence collection, which included the tracks that the UFOs have left in the mountains, and the trees and the plants that were destructed by their landing. We have gathered all those evidence, and we have also brought scientists to.
Thank you for your testimony. I'd like to reserve the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you. We're down to you, Representative. Yes, not. I'm sorry, Senator.
Yes, please make the distinction.
Yes, Senator Gavel.
I would like to address. First of all, I have a question for all of you, but following on what my colleague was just saying, what is the reaction of your government towards the transparency of this whole subject? As we know, the U.S. is very deficient, and probably the highest standard we've run across thus far is Uruguay, where it's so transparent that they even go to the effort to educate people in school with Air Force personnel. In China, what is the government transparent about this? Is there an official position in that regard? What's your government position?
Okay, let me begin first then. Our government, my government, in a lot of international conferences, a lot of media workers have asked me about these questions. Okay, my answer is this. This is to be open and to be objective and be pragmatic. And another thing is that being cautious. That is very, the position is that to be cautious. Well, the reason that we need to open up is because the China is going through the opening up and the transparent. So under this kind of circumstances, we can talk about this. And also the government is not very strict about keeping everything secret. For example, in the Air Force, that they have the compact with the UFO, and we have interview on all those of the stories, and they told us truthfully of their encounter. And sometimes the militaries, when they don't understand of some certain situations, they even come to us to consult us. So that we will try to relay some of the information on UFO to them. And however, we still be very cautious and vigilant as well. They don't want to take a non-scientific way of approach of studying UFO. They don't want to mix with anything that is not scientific. So they don't want any distractions. If only a purely UFO incident or ET incident, and then government will not interfere with any investigation. They will give us a more lax situation.
Your government. I just have one general question, and I apologize for excusing myself earlier. Is anybody familiar with Dr. Wood, a woman PhD on directed energy? She has written extensively about the use of directed energy to bring down the Twin Towers on 9/11. Are any of you, or maybe this is a question for the scientific panel tomorrow, or certainly my colleague here, but has any of you run across the issue of directed energy with respect to the UFO or the energy that obviously they possess that we don't understand for propulsion? And I would start with my colleague from Italy.
A consideration may be done in the case of unidentified submerged objects. As far as we know, when they are in the hydrosphere, these objects, well, they do not are in direct contact with the water. It seems that they are covered by a sort of pillow of energy, and this prevent any contact with the shell, with, you understand, with the hull. And probably what Antonio Neus said before is to be connected with this. It's the same kind, probably, of propulsion mean, a sort of electromagnetic propulsion which permits these objects to move in any kind of environment, deep space, without any kind of atmosphere, like our astronauts said. Any kind of atmosphere, ours or any other planets. And of course, also a more dense environment like water. So, as far as we know, probably there is a definite pattern in all this, in the possibility of an electromagnetic and anti-gravity system. Frankly, we still have to learn a lot about this.
Thank you. Any other comments on that?
Senator,
Nick?
yes. And with apologies for not having printed this off for the committee, but it was 468 pages. I can supply a hyperlink.
We accept that apology.
Though the Ministry of Defence were talking about the possibility that some UFOs were exotic plasmas, 3 sentences might be directly relevant to your question from Project Condine's final report. It says, there is evidence from openly published scientific papers that scientists in the former Soviet Union have taken a particular interest in UFO phenomena. They have identified the close connection with plasma technologies and are pursuing related technologies for potential military purposes. For example, very high power energy generation, RF weapons, impulse radars, air vehicle drag and radar signature reduction or control, and possibly for radar reflecting decoys.
Very good. Antonio, please.
Yes, Senator. Just wanted to add that one of the first people that looked at the propulsion systems of UFOs was one of the most qualified persons, because it was Professor Hermann Oberth, who was one of the fathers of the space age. As you know, the space age has three fathers: Tsiolkovsky in Russia, Robert Goddard in the United States, and Oberth in Germany. He was the mentor of von Braun. And he later worked for us too, like many of the German scientists from Operation Paperclip and that whole episode. But Oberth in the 50s became very interested in ufology. So one of the guys that invented rocket, he wrote the classic book about the rocket into interplanetary space. This was published in German in 1922, long time before the Nazis. And so it was a brilliant man. I'm honored that I met him when he was something like 96 years old. I didn't speak German, so I cannot say that I interviewed him, but at least I had the pleasure of meeting one of the fathers of the space age. I had to go to his house near Nuremberg. But he had wrote some papers, some articles, and obviously he was eminently qualified. The technical things I would have to look in my notes, so I don't want to speculate. One of the things he had to say, though, is because of the maneuverability, the change of course and 90-degree changes, turns, and things like that, the pilots or whoever beings were inside these objects had to be shielded from the rest of it. Otherwise, they would be crushed to death, he said. And these were in some papers he wrote in the 1950s. So actually, in the Rockefeller briefing document that I co-authored, in the quotation section, we do have some key quotes from Hermann Oberth. But if you're interested, I can get you some other articles that he published about this subject. There's another American scientist who used to work for NASA, Paul Hill, I believe was his name, who wrote a book after his death. I think his daughter had found these notes or whatever, and it was called Unconventional Flying Objects. And that's a pretty serious, sober, highly technical discussion of propulsion. So there's been many people that, well, not many, but there have been a few qualified people. There are some other not qualified, I would disregard those, but at least there are a few. There was another German who used the pseudonym Rose Sigma, who published a book called Ether Technologies. That was not his real name. I think his real name was Schneider Franken or something like that. I think he had maybe worked in Peenemünde also. Gordon Cooper, the astronaut Gordon Cooper, knew him. Gordon Cooper was very, very much interested in the UFO phenomenon. And so, yeah, there are several leads, although I'm sure that there are plenty more, but that would be classified.
Great. Thank you very much. Madam Chairman, I reserve the time or share the time with anybody who wants to use it.
All right. Congresswoman Kilpatrick?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was happy to hear in this afternoon session, after 3.5 days being here, that Mr. Huneeus, Pope, and Cameron did say the U.S. has participated a bit. I've been led to believe up until an hour ago that we hadn't done anything and that we were the big bear in the room. So I'm glad to hear that you acknowledge that we've done something.
Yes, absolutely.
You further went on to say the CIA was sued and released theirs in 1977. I think you said that, Mr. Huneeus, which is good. I don't want you.
Yeah.
This is a little editorial right here. That's all. Then the FBI did follow suit later and released it. I think, Mr. Cameron, you said, yeah, they released it. They're sitting files, but not the real thing. I think my question on all of that, releasing of the files, and I'm glad they did it, ordered by the court or otherwise, and that you all acknowledge that. That's good for our country to know that, for us here on the panel for sure. Did they acknowledge, do they believe that UFOs are real or not? Did they address after releasing the files, or they just gave you paper and you had to shift through them? I know we didn't get the meat you wanted to get, but did they say one way or the other whether UFOs are real or that extraterrestrial is a real phenomenon?
Well, I mean, the problem is that the files they released are sort of the mundane files, like Grant said, the citing files, or they're very old historical
citing
files.
Files means that they cited something somewhere.
Correct, but what we would want to see is some kind of conclusion. And those kind of documents seem
They
to
were
be...
not included.
Yeah, I mean, there are some conclusions, for instance, in the Condon Report, which was this famous project by the University of Colorado, but that was distorted too, because they wanted to close Blue Book. Now, some of the case histories in the Condon Report are valid. And actually, about 30% of the case histories in the Condon Report are unexplained. That's how much you will find in the U.S. files, that there are a certain percentage of cases that are unexplained.
So how would you sum what they released, and do you know of a U.S., can we conclude a position from our government on this issue based on what they've released through CIA or FBI?
The truth is, it's confusing. I mean, some people, like there is a Colonel John Alexander, he was involved in some study at the Pentagon in the 1980s, so this would have been much later, you know, when there wasn't Blue Book, all that, it was all history. And he claims it was not a formal project in the sense that, you know, they had to issue reports and things, but it was obviously tolerated by his superiors. And they went around and they briefed a number of people, including high-level people like admirals and generals and General Abrams, the head of the Star Wars SDI project, and people like that, very high-level people. And he wrote a book about this, so I'm not revealing anything that is unknown. And he claimed, so they would brief these people because this group of scientists that had clearances and were working within the Pentagon on the military-industrial complex would brief these generals and stuff because they thought that there was some kind of big project going on, according to Alexander. And then what would happen, if you read his book, is that most of these generals or admirals say, no, we don't have anything. I mean, we have no project. So that was the official record. But he tells in his book some anecdotes that then after the official meeting was over, then the admiral will come and whisper to him, but let me tell you about my sighting.
Okay.
So this is the kind of stuff you encounter.
It's kind of soft, but there was something.
There was something.
It was something, okay.
Yes.
Mr. Cameron, thank you very much, Mr. Hunes. You said, Mr. Cameron, that we were waiting for America to make the first move. What move would that be? What do you speak when you say that?
The move to disclosure to identifying the fact that it's an ET phenomena or whatever it is. I have heard stories from other governments, sort of off the record. They were asked, will you disclose? And they said, as soon as the Americans disclose, we'll be a close second. So I've heard stories like that. That's where I think the Americans sort of, especially when it comes to NATO, if you take a look at the NATO thing, America is basically the main thing in NATO. Everybody sort of takes their lead. They have a lot of power. I think it's the same thing in this field. That
so the world is waiting for the U.S. to say yay or nay on
or
UFO.
Set the policy or determine.
Or set the policy?
Well, the policy is basically sort of being set by the Americans. That
I thought the Americans hadn't done much on it.
Well, I mean, as I say, I think they've disclosed stuff. They have, I mean, they have disclosed a lot of documents. I mean, if you get the documents,
said that.
the
What have
Clinton
they
Library has disclosed thousands of pages of documents.
Right, okay.
And so, I mean, there are documents. It's the official conclusions. It's the official.
There are no conclusions from the documents.
Like the real top secret documents you won't find no matter what country you go to.
And our country has not concluded.
It's still on the position that there's nothing to it. And
Okay.
every other government, I think, goes by that and takes the same
That is a
position.
position.
Yeah.
If you've said, if they've released the files under court order, CIA and FBI.
Under
but you-
FOIA. You can get a lot under FOIA.
Okay, and they also sued them, it's, 1977.
Yeah.
So they have concluded. They released some and they've concluded there is none.
That's
There's-
their official
Okay.
conclusion, yeah.
All right, okay, that's good. Dr. Shelley, I'd like to spend the rest of my time with you just a bit before I yield back. Tell me about the Chinese UFO Federation. Is it an NGO, unrelated to the government? What is its mission?
Yes, it is an NGO. This is a private NGO.
What is the work of the Federation?
Our mission is that in the field of UFO, we conduct scientific research. And in recent years, what the senator have asked, we have conducted many scientific research. To give you an example, that I have the conference in the Manila, there was a General Curso, Colonel Curso. He is also a very famous expert on the Roswell case, and he worked in the Department of Defense, Pentagon. And then after what he had said, then he embraced me and hugged me, and then he gave me a book on the Roswell, and he says that for Professor Sun, my greatest friend, I believe that a person like you will help everybody to create a new world.
This was from a former Pentagon official who was so excited after learning about our scientific research results. Now we have a technology to turn water into anything, into fuel, into food, turning stone into food and into food. We're researching on these new technologies. We have many new things, new scientific research like this. We're now trying to find where aliens come from so that we can be inspired by them in the scientific area. But when saying that, we do have some scientific research and results in some particular areas already. Why did I say that we all have this nature to find our roots? I think that's in our DNA.
You are very much involved in is the China UFO Research Institute, established in 1980. What is it? How does it work? What is its mission?
Yes, the mission for this institute is to explore UFO issues scientifically. We go to conferences, and we also are interviewed constantly by international as well as domestic media. I mentioned the AP, CNN, BBC. This institute has been interviewed by all these media, and personally, I have been interviewed many times too. So, actually, there are two votes. People who are engaged in these institute, first, they are personally very interested in this topic, but also we have experts who are experts in areas such as how to make airplanes and astronomy and science. These experts use their expertise to do research. That is why this institute has been commended by the society. Well, originally, some people think that this is just for chit-chat, but we have elevated this topic, this issue, onto a higher level where we talk about how learning about UFOs, learning about aliens can help us solve environmental problems and health problems.
And is the Federation or the Institute located in any other countries outside of China? Do you have branches anywhere else in the world?
Yes, we do have branches outside of China. In other places, and they're not necessarily called an institute or a federation. They are maybe called a UFO club or association. So through these branches, we can collaborate. In fact, we are interacting with aliens already.
Of both of the Federation and of the Institute, yes? Question. Yes, they do. They carry on the programs.
Right, similar. Particularly, we have a World Chinese UFO Federation. I'm the chairman for that federation, so Chinese people around the world.
I mean, how are the Institute and the Federation funded? How do you operate? I've got a minute left and you've got it. How do you carry on your program? How are you funded?
Well, about funding, we are purely a private NGO. So, well, the government is very busy. They don't have time to take care of us. So, well, symbolically, they give us very little funding. So I have a very, very tough job because I have to think about how this federation and how this institute can survive. I have to find the funding. Some scientists and inventors have to prove that their research is viable, and that's my job. I have to let people know that what we're doing is viable so that we can find enough funding. But I can tell you that it's very difficult.
Thank you. Is there anyone that has time left that needs it? Before I take mine?
I believe I had two minutes left.
Okay, why don't you take your 2
Thank
minutes?
you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair. I'd like to know if any of you could tell us, the panel, whether in any of the disclosures you're aware of from government entities or from non-government, well, it'd have to be government entities, obviously, or from the United States. It doesn't have to be your government, your country, any government, where gun camera footage or files on analysis of materials have ever been released. Go ahead, Mr. Pope.
The United Kingdom certainly did have some cases where military jets were sent up to intercept UFOs being tracked on radar.
Similar to the Peru incident that we talked about this morning.
Correct, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
Some gun camera footage was taken, and certainly I'm aware of on-the-record testimony from former MOD officials saying they've seen it. To the best of my knowledge, none of that material has survived, and I've not seen it personally, but it was certainly existed at MOD.
So it's not released if it's, but you know it exists.
It existed. I believe it's lost or destroyed.
Okay, well, okay, let me ask this final, if I have 30 seconds.
Yes.
Is anybody aware of a, well, let me get this question in, please. Is anybody aware of a military person or a contractor for the military that's been released from a secrecy oath that they might have taken on this subject of UFOs from any country, again, your own or the U.S. or any other country?
In the case of Italy, we had in San Marino in 2000 the chief of the Reparto Generale Sicurezza of the Italian Air Force, who came in uniform to have a presentation of the UFO data, of the official UFO data, in the San Marino Congress. This man today is retired and would have been here if possible. He did not come because he told me he signed a sort of security statement for 20 years not to speak on these subjects, even if, after all, what he said in San Marino in 2000 is open. And this is curious.
Anybody else? So
I can give you just a quick example. I mentioned, I think in my testimony, Dick D'Amato, who worked for Senator Byrd, was given authorization to go to Area 51 to see if they're spending money on flying saucers and Aurora and all this kind of stuff. He met with Alfred O'Donnell. He offered him complete clearance from any sort of security oaths he had taken, and O'Donnell refused to talk. But Dick D'Amato did make that offer.
So there's been an offer.
There was an offer, and he refused to talk.
We're out of time. Thank you. I have a couple of quick questions, hopefully, and anyone can answer. I'd like to hear from all of you if we can do it short period of time. What are the practical steps that we can do to take this issue forward? And Is an international cooperative like the United Nations a possibility?
Yes, there is a possibility.
Okay,
You know that the Grenada resolution was simply frozen, and any member state of the United States could take this resolution and to put it into the agenda. Then we will have a vote from the United Nations, and we will see if by case this permanent commission for UFOs in the United Nations may be created or not. Personally, I try to do something with the San Marino Republic, with the Republic of San Marino, which is a member state of the United Nations. But frankly, I had some problems. We had some problems because the first question they asked me is, okay, but what do you think the United States government may think about this? I have nothing else to say.
okay. Antonio?
The UN, of course, would be excellent in my conversations with the different heads of the South American agencies. They're eager because, you know, they feel that, okay, they have these programs, which most of them have started recently, except Uruguay, who were the pioneers.
Right.
But they have nowhere to report. So, I mean, officially, some place where the data could begin to be officially and legally marshaled in one single place. So that would be a step that would be excellent. But the problem of the UN, it has to be a member state has to bring it up. In the case of Grenada, Prime Minister Gary was almost obsessed with the subject, and so he had like a mission, and he pursued it, as we know, for many years until he was overthrown because he wasn't taking care of the business in his own country. You know, he was spending so much time in New York that he was disregarding, you know, even though he was the founding father of that island. And then, I don't know, it would be nice to have congressional hearings, but I mean, I appreciate your work here greatly, but I mean, with people who are currently in Congress, because then the oath, you know, and then you could really bring officials, and by subpoena if necessary, and you know, and really try to get to the bottom of this. There's so much allegations and rumors. And probably half of those are false, and maybe the U.S. government is getting a bad rap, but it's partly their own fault, you know, because of so much secrecy. And we could, you know, what is really happening in Area 51? I mean, have we, you know, incorporated some of this technology into weapons? I mean, there's all these kinds of allegations, but because we're dealing with classified areas, it's impossible to know. And so that would be another step. If the other countries of the world saw that there were like hearings in the U.S. and stuff like that, probably they would do the same. Then you know, it would give cover to a lot of other countries, even though many countries, as you know, are trying, you know, and are releasing files, and in South America especially, they're creating agencies. So those would be two good steps, and there are probably others too. But
thank you, Mr. Pope.
If I can only say a few words too.
The head of the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs attended a Royal Society discussion meeting in the UK in 2010. Now, I hasten to add that was an astrobiology meeting and not a UFO meeting.
Right.
But it did discuss in a speculative way some of the issues that might arise, be they religious, scientific and technical, societal, if we did detect extraterrestrial life or even another civilization. But she said that when it comes to the role of the UN, one must approach the UN with consensus on this sort of issue. So I don't think there's much practical hope of that. On regard to your other question about practical steps that could be taken, I think one meaningful step would be to incorporate, whatever you believe about UFOs, some module into pilot training. Because whatever the government says or does about UFOs, civil and military pilots do continue to see these things.
Great idea. Thank you. Mr. Cameron.
I would agree with an international United Nations type thing. I don't think congressional will help because it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help you get elected, which is what it's all about. In terms of this week, I think we're no different than any other social or political movement, no matter how important we think we are, and when the time is right, it'll happen, and we have to keep making moves, and I think the move we've made this week to do this is a step ahead, so we are making steps, and it's like the women's right to vote. It started in 1848, they didn't get the right to vote till 1920, and even then their problems weren't solved. We're no different, we've got to make moves, we've got to put pressure on, that's how I think it's going to happen.
Thank you. Dr. Shelley?
孙教授 Yes, I've talked about I'm trying to facilitate a summit meeting to talk about UFO and universal exploration. And not only that, and we have, as a humankind, we've encountered many problems. Probably in this summit, we'll be able to solve some of the difficulties. Now, we are trying to the strength of all over the world. Now, I'm trying to form a committee of the thinkers of the world and try to gather all the intellectuals around the world together, and also that we should come to a conclusion on all the cases. And a few years ago, some of experts that some of people that advised that Senator Goldwater, whether he could conduct investigation or promote investigation of the Area 51. He did not believe about this Area 51. And I was very honored. He invited me. And so we had a small group formed, and Senator Goldwater was a chair and I was a co-chair. And then regretfully, he was quite old at the time, and he went to the hospital. So he asked his secretary to apologize for me for the unsuccessful of this forming a group. So you can see that for such a prestigious person to be involved in the investigation, if we can get somebody like that, we will come to a fruitful conclusion. This is a very major event. If after the investigation and we come to a conclusion that there is no UFO or ET, then that's fine. But if we can verify there is actually UFO and ET, that's great.
You already gave your answer to this one, didn't you?
Excuse me?
Did you give your answer to this question?
Yes,
I think you did, yeah. You started. Yes, he
The
did.
problem of interacting on international level and having the possibility to bring this argument to the attention of United Nations and so on is a big one. I think that probably little nations may be more interested. Big nations may have big problems. In fact, as I told before, I tried to move something with the little Republic of San Marino, since this could be extremely simple. But there are problems because, you see, for instance, in Italy, even if we have an official UFO group in the Italian Air Force, we have the facts, but we have no study, in the sense that our military say we are only involved in defense. That's all. We don't like to draw any conclusion. If we still have this attitude at the political level, everywhere, we will not be able to do anything. And so I think that we must change our mentality, our way of thinking. We should be aware of the fact that we are facing something absolutely new and absolutely real and absolutely from outside. Don't remember that the first UFO sightings occurred in Europe and particularly in Italy in the 30s. They were advanced, intelligent, piloted crafts. They were studied by the fascist government.
Okay.
Nobody knew this up to some years ago, but if this is true, and this is true, this means that these objects do not come from the Earth. They come from outside the Earth. And if this is true, we should be aware that we are facing an historical argument. We are still discussing. And from a sociological point of view, I think that we are not too different from the cargo cult people who spoke in the Pacific after the World War II about the passing airplanes, and they thought they were some kind of divine means and so on. Apart from this, we do not know the origin of this intelligence and of these crafts. But what is sure that we are sufficiently lucky that this intelligence are not hostile, and this is not too much, frankly. What we should do, I think, is just to be aware of this and to try to understand more, but all together. Otherwise, if we still continue to be separated state by state, we won't do any conclusion.
Thank you very much. Senator Gravel, you have 3 minutes left.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Oh, your son.
Following along with your recommendations, I had suggested earlier that and I think Mr. Cameron has shared that same view, is that another hearing, whether it's like this one or whether it's in Congress, probably won't advance our goals all that much. But there's no reason why, with the various countries represented here, with the various scholars and military officers, that we would try to, within our own communities, to get them to endorse a resolution, a very simple, straightforward resolution, calling upon the General Assembly, not get waylaid to the Security Council, because that's a dead letter also, but to take the matter to the General Assembly. All we would need is one country, but I think that we have several countries from South America, and certainly this group here, who might have enough influence to get their government to go on record and to field a resolution creating an agency of the United Nations without a lot of powers defined, but specifically with the goal to organize a global conference, not a hearing, a global conference of the scholars and scientists and whoever that would come together and to fund it both from public and private sources, so that within a couple of years we could convene a conference that would command the attention of the world. I have no doubt, and at one point in my career was a delegate to the United Nations from the Senate for 4 months, and I have no doubt that we could field that kind of a resolution and get it adopted. And then it would be the responsibility, or that would be the aegis of it all, that would carry it forward, and then we could all have something now to hang our hats on. Right now, we're hanging our hat on the fine work that has been putting together this particular conference, but we can elevate it one notch higher, and not one notch higher. I mean, we can elevate it right to where it really belongs as an issue, because it's a global issue. We could elevate it right to the General Assembly of the United Nations, and I think and so what. I have a draft that Danny was kind enough that Antonio were preparing. I'll draft something based upon their work, try to get it done by tomorrow, and be very simple. I mean, it's not going to be controversial. We've already talked about it, or I've raised it with my colleagues, and this is a given, you know. So we'll have something that not only the various members who have testified, members on our side of the table, and various members of the public may want to sign a petition joining this effort, and then hope that an organization, either the organization that did this, or I've talked a little bit with some others that have an organization that might want to take this up and follow through, raise the money to just get it, help get it to the New York at probably the next session that could treat this would be next October, next September, next October. So, and I certainly myself would be happy to travel to New York and try to lobby for that. But it would take, we need a country to do it. And so it's up to you to see where you have the influence within your country and all we need is one. All we need is one. And that would be the sponsor, and I'm sure once you got one country with a sponsor, several other countries would follow suit and join on to it. So we could have a bevy of countries. And I think, just to end on this time, I would guarantee that it would pass, because there's a lot of resentment in the General Assembly with respect to the conduct of the Security Council in a lot of other affairs.
Your time is up.
Thank you. So we'll be at this tomorrow.
I want to thank our panel today. You have been here, and appreciate your time and your effort and your willingness to speak up. And with that, we are adjourned.
Just the standard announcements. Remember, we have Kevin Randall at 7, Nick Pope. You haven't got enough of Nick this afternoon, I'm sure. He gets a full hour beginning at 8. And Gary Hesseltine will be giving his detectives analysis, the evidentiary hearing on sightings in the UK as well. Don't forget Stan Freeman's fire sale. Prices are going back up tomorrow. Well, we're not sure about that, but they could.